Sometimes the people who hurt us most leave behind more than just pain. Mason Quinn never imagined his estranged mother's death would give him anything but relief. He inherited her abandoned house in a forgotten corner of the city, expecting dust and bitter memories. What he found changed everything. In the bathroom, above a sealed toilet buried beneath years of filth, sat a locked black chest no one had seen in decades. Inside was something that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about his childhood, his mother, and why she really left. What could she have hidden that was worth keeping secret, even in death? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mason Quinn sat at his kitchen table in the pre-dawn darkness, staring at the envelope that had arrived 3 days ago. The return address belonged to Whitmore and Associates, a law firm he'd never heard of, located in a part of the city he hadn't visited in over 20 years. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he hadn't noticed. The envelope contained a single sheet of cream-colored paper with elegant letterhead, informing him that his mother, Lorraine Quinn, had passed away at the age of 63, and that he was the sole beneficiary of her estate. Were his mother, the woman who had walked out when he was 10 years old and never looked back. The apartment around him was small, but meticulously clean. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen barely large enough for a table, and 2 chairs. He'd lived here for 6 years, ever since his daughter was born. The walls were decorated with Lily's artwork, from school crayon drawings of butterflies and rainbows, a handprint turkey from last Thanksgiving, a watercolor sunset that she'd been so proud of, she'd made him promise to keep it forever. Lily, 8 years old, sleeping soundly in the room down the hall, her nightlight casting soft shadows through the crack beneath her door. She was his entire world, the reason he got up every morning, the reason he worked double shifts at the warehouse, the reason he kept going when everything else felt too heavy to carry. He'd never told her much about his own mother. What was there to say? That she'd left one Tuesday morning while he was at school, leaving behind nothing but a note on the kitchen counter that said, "I'm sorry. I have to go. Take care of yourself." He'd been raised by his grandfather after that, a quiet, steady man who worked at the railway and never spoke ill of anyone, even the daughter who'd abandoned her own son. His grandfather had passed 5 years ago, heart attack, sudden and merciless. Mason had been 28, trying to navigate fatherhood alone after Lily's mother had decided she wasn't ready for the responsibility. History, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. Now his own mother was gone, and apparently she'd left him something. The lawyer's letter mentioned a property, a house in the Riverside district, an area that had once been working class, respectable, but had declined steadily over the decades. Mason had grown up in that house. He remembered the creaking stairs, the way the afternoon sun would slant through the kitchen window, the small backyard where he'd played with toy soldiers in the dirt. He also remembered the silence after she left, the way the house had felt like a museum of abandonment, every room a reminder of the person who should have been there but wasn't. The lawyer's office appointment was scheduled for 9 o'clock that morning. Mason glanced at the clock, 5:43. Lily's alarm would go off at 6:30. He'd make her breakfast, walk her to the bus stop, and then drive across town to hear whatever formalities needed to be addressed. The letter had been clear. The house was his, along with whatever contents remained inside. No mortgage, no liens, just a structure that had been sitting vacant for months, slowly decaying in a neighborhood that nobody wanted to remember. He heard the soft padding of small feet in the hallway. A moment later, Lily appeared in the doorway, her brown hair tangled from sleep, clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. "Daddy, you're up early." Mason managed a smile and opened his arms. She crossed the kitchen and climbed into his lap, still warm and heavy with sleep. "Couldn't sleep, sweetheart. But I'm okay." "Is it about the letter?" He'd made the mistake of leaving it on the table yesterday. Lily had seen it, asked what it was, and he'd given her the simplest version of the truth he could manage. His mother had died, and there were some things he needed to take care of. "Yeah," he said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. "I have to go meet with a lawyer today. Mrs. Kowalski is going to pick you up from the bus stop and stay with you until I get home." "The lawyer is about your mum?" "My mother." "Yes." Lily was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the worn edge of her rabbit's ear. "Were you sad when she died?" It was the kind of question only a child could ask, direct, honest, cutting through all the complicated emotions adults learn to bury under polite evasions. Mason considered how to answer. He'd always tried to be truthful with Lily, even when the truth was difficult. "I don't know what I felt," he finally said. "She left a long time ago. I was angry at her for a very long time. Maybe I still am. But she was still my mother, and I think part of me always hoped she might come back and explain why she left. And now she can't. No, now she can't." Lily nodded solemnly, processing this in whatever way an 8-year-old mind processes such things. Then she looked up at him with those serious brown eyes that reminded him so much of his grandfather. "Are you going to be okay, Daddy?" The question nearly broke him. Here was his daughter, barely awake, worried about him, when she should be thinking about nothing more complicated than what cartoon to watch or whether she'd have chocolate milk with breakfast. He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I'm going to be fine, sweetheart. I promise." The lawyer's office was in a building that had probably been impressive in the 1,970 seconds, but now looked tired and forgotten, much like the neighborhood surrounding it. The elevator groaned its way to the 3rd floor, and Mason found himself in a waiting room with faded carpet and outdated magazines spread across a coffee table that had seen better decades. A receptionist, somewhere in her 60s, with kind eyes and reading glasses on a chain, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Quinn?" "Mr. Whitmore is ready for you." Chester Whitmore turned out to be a man in his early 70s, with a full head of white hair and a manner that suggested he'd been practicing law since before Mason was born. His office smelled of old books and furniture polish. He rose from behind his desk and extended a hand. "Mr. Quinn, thank you for coming in. Please, sit down." Mason took the chair across from the desk. Whitmore settled back into his own seat and opened a file folder. "First, let me express my condolences for your loss. I understand you and your mother were estranged. We hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Whitmore nodded, as if this confirmed something in his notes. "Your mother came to see me about 8 months ago. She was quite specific about her wishes. The property at 447 Riverside Avenue is yours, free and clear. The house has been vacant since her death. She'd been living there alone for many years." "She never left the city?" "No. According to her instructions, she remained in that house for the duration." Whitmore paused, studying Mason's face. "She didn't leave much in terms of financial assets, a small savings account which will cover the property taxes for the next year or so. But the house itself is yours to do with as you see fit. Sell it, rent it, live in it. That's entirely your decision." Mason tried to imagine returning to that house, walking through those rooms again as an adult. The thought made his chest tight. "Is there anything else?" "Just the keys." Whitmore produced a small envelope from the file and slid it across the desk. Inside was a single tarnished key on a plain metal ring. "I believe you'll find everything else you need at the property itself. Your mother was a very private person, Mr. Quinn. Whatever she wanted you to know, I suspect she left it there for you to find." The drive to Riverside took 40 minutes through midday traffic. Mason hadn't been to this part of the city in more than 2 decades, and the changes were stark. Businesses had closed, buildings had been abandoned, whole blocks looked like they were slowly surrendering to entropy. The Riverside district had once housed factory workers and shopkeepers, people who took pride in their modest homes and tidy yards. Now it looked like a place people left behind, one moving truck at a time. Number 4, 147, stood on a corner lot, a Victorian-style house that had probably been charming once. Now the paint was peeling, the front porch sagged slightly on one side, and the yard was overgrown with weeds that had taken over where a lawn used to be. Several windows on the second floor were cracked, and the front door looked weathered enough that Mason worried the key might not even work. He sat in his truck for a long moment, engine off, just staring at the place where he'd spent the first 10 years of his life. Memory was a strange thing. He could still see himself as a boy, running up those porch steps, bursting through that front door, yelling for his mother to look at something he'd found or made or discovered. He could see her in the kitchen window, could almost smell whatever she'd been cooking for dinner. Then he remembered coming home from school that Tuesday afternoon, age 10, to find his grandfather waiting inside instead. The look on the old man's face. The careful, gentle way he'd explained that Mason's mother had gone away and that Mason would be living with him from now on. The key turned in the lock with surprising ease. The front door swung open with a long, drawn-out creak that sounded exactly like Mason remembered. He stepped inside, and 23 years collapsed into nothing. The living room was frozen in time, the same couch, now covered in a layer of dust that suggested no one had sat on it in months. The same coffee table, the same worn rug, the same bookshelf against the wall. But there were newer additions too, a flat-screen television that looked about 10 years old, a reading lamp beside the couch, a stack of mail on the side table that had yellowed with age. His mother had lived here, alone, for all those years. Mason moved through the house slowly, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The kitchen looked different. She'd updated the appliances at some point, though even those were dated now. The refrigerator was empty, except for some condiments that had expired years ago. In the sink sat a single coffee mug, as if she'd washed it and set it there to dry, intending to use it again the next morning. A morning that never came. Upstairs, he found 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom where his mother had slept was sparse. A bed, a dresser, a closet full of clothes that smelled of dust and loneliness. The second bedroom appeared to be used for storage, filled with boxes and old furniture. The third bedroom stopped him cold. It was his room. His childhood bedroom, preserved exactly as he'd left it. The same blue curtains, the same small desk in the corner, the same shelf full of books and toys. His old bedspread, decorated with spaceships, was still neatly made. Posters of planets and astronauts still hung on the walls. She'd kept it. All these years, she'd kept his room exactly as it was. Mason stood in the doorway, unable to make himself step inside. His throat was tight, his eyes burning. This room was a shrine to the boy he'd been, to the son who'd lived here before she left. Why? Why keep it like this if she'd walked away and never come back? He forced himself to turn away, to keep moving. There was still one more room to check, the bathroom at the end of the hall. The door was closed, and when he pushed it open, the smell hit him immediately. Mold, mildew, and something else, something stagnant and wrong. The bathroom was a disaster. The toilet had been sealed shut with duct tape and cardboard, layer upon layer of it, as if his mother had been trying to keep something in or keep something out. The sink was coated in grime, the mirror so filthy he could barely see his reflection. Water damage stained the ceiling, and sections of the wallpaper were peeling away. And there, above the toilet, he noticed something odd. The ceiling looked wrong, like there was a seam where there shouldn't be one. Mason stepped carefully onto the edge of the bathtub to get a closer look at the ceiling panel. He pushed upward, and with a little more pressure, it came loose entirely. A cloud of dust fell, making him cough and shield his eyes. When the air cleared, he could see into the small space above the sealed toilet. There, covered in dust and water stains, sat a black chest. It was roughly 2 feet long, a foot wide, and secured with a heavy padlock that had rusted with age. Mason carefully maneuvered it out of the hiding spot and lowered it to the floor. The chest was heavier than he expected, and when he set it down, Something inside shifted with a soft, sliding sound. His hands were shaking. The lock was solid, impossible to open without a key he didn't have. But the metal was old, the screws holding the latch plate were corroded, and he thought he might be able to pry it open with the right tools. He carried the chest downstairs and out to his truck. Whatever his mother had hidden in this box, whatever she'd felt the need to, seal away above a toilet she'd rendered unusable. Mason needed to see it. He needed to understand what could have been so important that she'd go to such lengths to keep it secret. The drive home felt longer than 40 minutes. The black chest sat on the passenger seat beside him, and Mason couldn't stop glancing at it, as if it might somehow open on its own and spill its secrets before he was ready. His mother had lived in that house for 23 years after abandoning him there. She'd kept his room like a museum. She'd hidden something in the bathroom, something important enough to seal away and protect. Nothing about this made sense. By the time Mason pulled into his parking spot at the apartment building, he'd made a decision. He would open the chest. He would look at whatever was inside. And then, maybe, he'd finally understand the woman who'd given birth to him and then walked away. Mrs. Kowalski had Lily at the playground when he arrived. He could hear his daughter's laughter from the parking lot, bright and uncomplicated. Mason grabbed the chest from his truck and carried it upstairs to his apartment, setting it on the kitchen table. He found his toolbox under the sink and selected a flathead screwdriver and a hammer. The screws holding the latch were so corroded they crumbled under pressure. Within 10 minutes, the lock assembly fell away entirely and the chest was open. Mason lifted the lid. Inside, organized almost methodically, was a life he'd never known his mother had lived. And on top of everything else, bound together with a rubber band that had deteriorated with age, was a stack of letters. All of them were addressed to him. All of them were unopened, never sent. Mason sat frozen at the kitchen table, staring at the bundle of letters in his hands. The rubber band had left an impression on the yellowed envelopes, and the top one was dated November 1996, 1 year after his mother had left. His name was written across the front in her careful handwriting. His hands trembled as he slid the first letter from its envelope. The paper inside was lined notebook paper, and it had yellowed with age. The ink had faded slightly, but was still readable. "My dearest Mason," it began, "you turned 11 last week. I watched you from across the street as your grandfather took you out for ice cream at Moretti's. You got chocolate chip, just like you always did. You smiled, but I could tell you were sad. I could see it in your eyes, even from that distance. I want you to know that leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. I know you must hate me. I would hate me too. But I need you to understand, I left to keep you safe. There are things in this world, dangerous things, that you're better off not knowing about. I watch over you from far away, and every day I see the wonderful boy you're becoming. Your grandfather is giving you the life I couldn't. I'm so sorry, my sweet boy. I'm so sorry." Mason's vision blurred. He set the letter down and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, willing himself not to break down. She'd watched him. She'd been there, somewhere in the shadows of his childhood, close enough to see but too far away to reach. He picked up the second letter, dated March 1998. "Mason, you're in middle school now. I saw you at the science fair last week. Your volcano project was amazing. You always loved experiments. You've grown so tall. You look more like your grandfather every day. I want to talk to you, to explain everything, but I can't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The danger hasn't passed. Just know that I think about you every single day. I love you more than you'll ever know." Letter after letter, year after year. His mother had documented his life from the periphery. She'd seen him graduate 8th grade. She'd been somewhere in the crowd when he'd played basketball in high school. She'd watched from a distance when his grandfather had died, though she'd never approached. Him never offered comfort. The letters stopped abruptly in 2020, 5 years ago. The last one was different from the others, shorter, more urgent. Mason, I don't have much time left. I'm sick, and the doctors say there's nothing they can do. I've spent the last 25 years watching you from the shadows, and I know I can never make up for what I took from you. But I need you to know the truth. Everything is in the chest. All the answers you deserve. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to tell you in person. I love you, Mason. I always have. Mum. Mason set the letter down carefully, his chest tight. He looked back into the chest and found photographs beneath where the letters had been. Dozens of them. Some in protective sleeves, others loose and bent at the corners. The first one made his breath catch. It was him, aged 9 or 10, standing with his mother outside what looked like a carnival. They were both smiling, cotton candy in his hand, his mother's arm around his shoulders. But it was the third person in the photo that made Mason's pulse quicken. A man standing just behind them, tall with dark hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Mason had no memory of this day, no memory of this man. He shuffled through more photographs. The same man appeared in several of them, always in the background, always watching. In one photo, the man's hand was on his mother's shoulder, and she looked tense, her smile forced. At the bottom of the stack, Mason found a newspaper clipping, carefully folded and preserved in a plastic sleeve. The headline read, "Local businessman under investigation for fraud." The article was dated August 1995, just weeks before his mother had disappeared. Mason read quickly. Wallace Granger, a financial consultant, was under investigation for embezzling funds from elderly clients. Multiple victims had come forward. The district attorney was building a case. The photograph accompanying the article showed a man in a business suit standing outside a courthouse. It was the same man from the carnival photos, the same man who'd been standing behind Mason and his mother. Mason grabbed his phone and typed, "Wallace Granger fraud, 1995, into the search bar. The results came back immediately. Granger had been charged in September 1995, but had disappeared before trial. A warrant had been issued for his arrest, but he'd never been found. The case had gone cold. The victims had never recovered their money. Wallace Granger had simply vanished, just like Mason's mother had vanished from his life. The connection was impossible to ignore. His mother had known Granger. She'd been close to him, close enough for photos, close enough that Mason had spent time with the man, and then Granger had been exposed, and she'd run. Mason's hands shook as he reached back into the chest. There had to be more. His mother had said the answers were here. His fingers closed around something else, a book, leather-bound and worn. He pulled it out and recognized it immediately as a journal, his mother's journal. He opened to the first page and saw the date, January 1995, 8 months before she'd left. The first entry was mundane notes about her day, about Mason's progress in school. But as he flipped through the pages, the tone shifted. February brought mentions of W and concerns about money. March included an entry that made Mason's stomach clench. W says he can help us, says he has investment opportunities. I want to believe him. By April, doubt had crept in. Something isn't right. The numbers don't make sense. When I ask W to explain, he gets angry. May was worse. I looked at the documents W left on the table. Those aren't investments. Those are people's life savings, and they're disappearing. What has he done? June brought fear. W knows I saw the files. He came by today. He wasn't asking. He was threatening. Said if I told anyone, there would be consequences. He looked at Mason when he said it. Mason's hands clenched around the journal. This man had threatened him, had used Mason as leverage to keep his mother silent. The entries became more frantic through the summer. His mother documented everything she could about Granger's schemes, writing down names and numbers as if she were building a case. But she was also terrified. trapped between wanting to do the right thing and needing to protect her child. The final entry before she left was dated the 12th of September, 1995. Mason remembered that date. It was the Tuesday she'd disappeared. I can't stay. If I stay, he'll use Mason to control me. If I testify, he'll hurt Mason to punish me. The only way to keep my son safe is to leave. If W thinks I've abandoned Mason, then Mason stops being useful as leverage. My boy will hate me. He'll think I didn't love him. But he'll be alive. He'll be safe. I'd rather have him hate me and be safe than love me and be in danger. I hope someday he understands. The journal fell from Mason's hands and hit the table. He stood abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun was setting, painting the parking lot in shades of orange and gold. His mother hadn't abandoned him because she didn't care. She'd abandoned him because she cared too much. She'd chosen to become the villain in his story so that he could have a story at all. He heard the front door open. Lily's voice called out, "Daddy, we're back!" Mason wiped his eyes quickly and turned to see his daughter bounce into the kitchen, her backpack still on her shoulders. Mrs. Kowalski followed more slowly, her kind eyes taking in the scene, the open chest, the scattered letters and photographs. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked gently. Mason managed a nod. "Thank you for watching her." Mrs. Kowalski left quietly. Lily approached the table, her eyes wide. "What's all this?" "Things that belong to my mother," Mason said. Lily picked up one of the photographs, the one from the carnival. "Is this you? You were so little. That's me. And this is your mum?" She studied the woman in the photo. "She looks nice." Mason swallowed hard. "Yeah, she does." As he held his daughter, Mason's eyes fell on the journal lying open on the table, and he realized he understood his mother now in a way he never had before. Because if someone threatened Lily, Mason would do exactly what his mother had done. He would disappear. He would sacrifice anything to keep her safe. The question now was, what else had his mother left in this chest? And more importantly, was Wallace Granger still out there? After Lily went to bed that night, Mason returned to the chest. He'd spent the evening going through the motions, making dinner, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories, but his mind had been elsewhere, circling back to the journal entries and the photographs and the name Wallace Granger. Now, in the quiet of his kitchen, with only the hum of the refrigerator for company, he could focus. He pulled out more items from the chest, laying them carefully on the table. There were bank statements, photocopies of documents with official letterheads, and handwritten notes in his mother's precise script. Near the bottom, he found another bundle of letters, but these were different. The envelopes were addressed to his mother, and they'd been opened. The return addresses were from various places: Seattle, Phoenix, Atlanta, Portland. No names, just P.O. boxes. Mason opened the first one, postmarked from Seattle in 1997. The handwriting was angular and harsh. "Lorraine, I know where you are. I know about the boy. Did you really think you could hide from me? You keep your mouth shut, and everyone stays safe. You talk, and I'll make sure you regret it. You know what I'm capable of." The words were like ice water down his spine. Mason opened another letter, this one from Phoenix in 1999. "Still watching, Lorraine. The boy is getting bigger. Looks healthy. Would be a shame if something happened to him. Remember our agreement?" Mason's hands tightened on the paper. His mother hadn't just run once. She'd been running for years, constantly looking over her shoulder, living in fear that Granger would make good on his threats. The latest letter in the bundle was from Portland, dated 2018. "Only 7 years ago. You're getting older, Lorraine, so am I. But I haven't forgotten what you know. The boy is a man now, has a daughter of his own. Pretty little thing. It would be unfortunate if history repeated itself." Mason's blood turned to ice. Granger had known about Lily, had been watching not just Mason but his daughter. He stood abruptly and walked to Lily's bedroom door, opening it just enough to see her sleeping peacefully. The sight should have been comforting, but now all Mason could think about was that a dangerous man had been watching his family. He returned to the kitchen and picked up his phone. He typed Wallace Granger again, this time adding current location. The results were sparse. A few old articles about the fraud case, some legal documents from the 1990 seconds, but nothing recent. It was as if Granger had successfully erased himself after fleeing. Mason set the phone down. If Granger had been sending letters as recently as 2018, that meant he'd been alive and active just a few years ago. Where was he now? Was he still out there, still watching? He reached back into the chest, digging deeper. Near the bottom, his fingers brushed against something solid, a book, smaller than the journal. He pulled it out and found an old address book, the kind people used before smartphones. The pages were worn, many entries crossed out. Mason flipped through, finding mostly unfamiliar names. But near the back, on a page marked with a folded corner, he found an entry that made him stop. T. Lowell, FBI. Rhett, Montana, followed by a phone number. FBI. His mother had known someone in the FBI. Mason checked the time just after midnight, which meant it was just after 11 in Montana, late but not unreasonably so. He dialed before he could talk himself out of it. The phone rang 4 times. Mason was about to give up when a gruff voice answered. "This better be important. I'm looking for Terence Lowell. My name is Mason Quinn. My mother was Lorraine Quinn." There was a long pause. Then the voice came back, softer now. "Lorraine? Is she all right? She passed away a few months ago." Another pause. "I'm sorry to hear that. She was a brave woman. You knew her?" "I did. A long time ago." Mason heard movement on the other end, the creak of a chair. "How did you get this number?" "She left it for me. In a chest full of documents about Wallace Granger." The silence that followed was heavy. When Lowell spoke again, his voice was harder, more alert. "You found her evidence?" "I found something. Letters, journal entries, photographs. But I don't understand all of it." "Where are you right now?" "At home. In my apartment." "Are you alone?" Mason thought of Lily sleeping down the hall. "My daughter is here. She's 8. Listen to me carefully, Mason. Your mother came to me in 1995, right before Wallace Granger disappeared. She had information about his operation names, account numbers, evidence that could have put him away for decades. But she refused to testify, said she couldn't risk it because of you. He threatened me. I found the letters he sent her. Then you know what kind of man he is." Lowell's voice was grim. "Your mother and I stayed in contact over the years. She'd send me updates, anything new she found. But we could never get enough to move forward without her testimony. Did you know he was still sending her threats? As recently as 7 years ago? I knew he was still alive. Still out there. We tried to track him down several times, but he's smart. Changed his identity probably more than once." Mason's mind was reeling. "Is my daughter in danger?" "I don't know," Lowell said honestly. "If Granger is still alive, and if he knows you have your mother's evidence, then yes, you could be at risk. Without more information, I can't say for certain." "What should I do?" "First, don't go back to that house alone. Second, I want you to send me everything you found. Photos of the documents, scans of the letters, all of it. I still have contacts at the Bureau. If there's enough evidence, we might be able to reopen the case." They talked for another 20 minutes. By the time Mason hung up, it was nearly 1 in the morning. He spent the next 2 hours carefully photographing every document in the chest, every letter, every page of the journal. He uploaded them to an encrypted cloud service Lowell had recommended, then sent the access information. Mason knew he should sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop. He made coffee and sat at the table, looking at the spread of his mother's life laid out before him. 23 years of fear, of vigilance, of loving her son from a distance. His phone buzzed. A text from Lowell. Got the files. This is good stuff. I'm making some calls. Sit tight. Another message followed. And Mason, be careful. If your mother was right about Granger having help, then people are going to be very unhappy that this evidence exists. Mason replied with, understood, and set the phone down. He walked to Lily's room again, opening the door just to hear her breathing. Back in the kitchen, he began packing everything into the chest. He couldn't keep it here. If someone came looking, the apartment would be the first place they'd check. His grandfather's pocket watch sat on his dresser, a gift the old man had given him at 18. It was one of the few family heirlooms Mason possessed. He picked it up now, feeling the weight of it, and an idea formed. He would hide the chest somewhere safe. He would wait for Lowell to make contact. And he would watch over Lily the way his mother had watched over him. Because if Wallace Granger was still out there, Mason needed to be ready. The next day felt like the longest of Mason's life. He went through the motions, dropping Lily off at school, going to work at the warehouse, picking her up in the afternoon, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying his mother's journal entries, the threatening letters, the floor plan sketch he'd found tucked in the back of her address book. That sketch haunted him. It showed his old bedroom with an X marked on the floor, and beneath it his mother had written, "Under the place where you dreamed of stars." His bedroom. The spaceship bedspread. He'd spent countless nights in that room, dreaming of space, of exploration, of adventures among the stars. And apparently his mother had hidden something there. By late afternoon, when Lily was safely occupied with homework, Mason received the call he'd been waiting for. "I'm in town," Lowell said, without preamble. "Can you meet me somewhere public?" They agreed on a coffee shop 3 blocks from Mason's apartment. Mason arranged for Mrs. Kowalski to watch Lily again, inventing a story about a work meeting. "You've been having a lot of meetings lately," Lily observed, looking up from her math worksheet. "Just work stuff, sweetheart. Nothing to worry about." The coffee shop was moderately crowded when Mason arrived. He spotted Lowell immediately, a man in his 70s with steel-grey hair and military posture. He sat at a corner table with clear views of both entrances. Mason approached, and Lowell stood, extending a hand. "Mason Quinn, you look like your mother. People say I look like my grandfather. You have his build, but you have her eyes." Lowell gestured to the empty chair. "Sit." Mason ordered coffee and returned to the table. Lowell had a laptop open, screen angled away from other customers. "I've been going through the files you sent. Your mother was thorough. Is it enough to reopen the case?" "It's enough to make some very interesting connections." Lowell turned the laptop. It showed a network diagram with names and companies connected by lines. "Your mother documented 12 years of Wallace Granger's activities. She tracked the money, identified victims and shell companies. But more importantly, she identified his associates." Lowell pointed to several names. "These men helped Granger hide after he fled. They're still active, still running businesses. If we can prove they assisted a fugitive, we can bring them down too. One of them might give up Granger's location for a lighter sentence." Mason leaned forward, studying the names. "What's the next step?" "The FBI will need to verify everything. That'll take time, but I have a contact who's willing to look at this unofficially first. If she thinks it's solid, she can expedite the investigation." Lowell paused. "But there's something else. Something your mother mentioned years ago. The map, the thing hidden in my old bedroom." "Exactly. She told me she had a fail-safe, something that would prove Granger's guilt, beyond doubt, insurance in case something happened to her. But she never told me what it was or where. Just that if she died, you'd be able to find it." Mason pulled out his phone and showed Lowell the photograph of the floor plan. "Under the place where I dreamed of stars." Lowell studied it. "Your bedroom?" "I had a bedspread with spaceships, posters of planets on the walls." "Then that's where we need to look." I want to come with you to the house, tomorrow morning, early, before sunrise if possible. Why before sunrise? Because if anyone is watching that house, they're less likely to be alert at that hour. And because I want to be in and out before the neighborhood wakes up. Mason felt a chill. You think someone is watching? Your mother's last letter mentioned that Granger knew about your daughter. That means he's been keeping tabs on you. We have to assume he's interested in what you might find. The thought of Granger watching made Mason's protective instincts flare. My daughter will be fine as long as she's not with you when you go back. Keep her with your neighbor. Don't tell her where you're going. They arranged to meet at the house at 5 the next morning. Lowell would bring equipment, lights, tools for prying up floorboards, and what he called tactical awareness. That evening, Mason tried to act normal for Lily's sake. They made dinner together, practiced spelling words, watched a nature documentary. But when she went to bed, she paused in the doorway. Daddy, are we in trouble? The question hit him hard. No, sweetheart. Why would you think that? You seem worried, and you keep looking at your phone. She twisted her rabbit's ear. Did I do something wrong? Mason crossed the room and knelt in front of her. Lily, listen to me. You haven't done anything wrong. You're perfect. I am worried about some grown-up things, but none of it is your fault, okay? She nodded slowly. Will you tell me when you're not worried anymore? The second I'm not worried anymore, you'll be the first to know, I promise. After Lily was asleep, Mason sat at the kitchen table with the black chest. He went through the journal again, looking for anything he'd missed. On a page dated July 1995, he found it. In the margin, next to an entry about Granger's threats, his mother had written numbers 447231995. Mason stared at them. 447 the address, 23 a date, 1995 the year. He flipped back through the journal, looking for entries dated the 23rd of September 1995. 11 days after his mother had left. The entry was short. Back to the house today while Missy was at school. Left him a piece of home in the place he loved most. If anything happens to me, he'll know where to look. But there was more. In the corner of the page, his mother had drawn a tiny star with numbers in each point. 4, 7, 2, 3, 5. A combination. His mother had left a combination code. Mason texted Lowell. Found something. Combination code 47235. The reply came quickly. Good work. That'll save us time tomorrow. Get some sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. Mason spent hours researching Wallace Granger, reading old articles, studying the fraud case. What he found painted a picture of a methodical predator. Granger had targeted vulnerable elderly people, gaining their trust, then draining their accounts. The estimated total was over $15 million. And when his mother discovered what he was doing, Granger had turned his cruelty toward her. Mason found a photo from an old news article, Granger leaving the courthouse, looking confident. The photo was grainy, but Mason could see the cold calculation in the man's eyes. This was the man who'd stolen his childhood. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mason's blood went cold as he read, Your mother knew when to stay quiet. Be smarter than she was. His hands shook as he forwarded it to Lowell. The response came immediately. Don't reply. I'm sending someone to watch your building. Tonight. Lock your doors. Mason checked every lock twice, then stood outside Lily's door, listening to her breathe. Around 3 in the morning, he spotted a dark sedan park across the street. A man got out and leaned against the hood, not moving. Mason's phone buzzed. That's our guy. He'll stay until we leave. Try to get an hour of sleep. But sleep didn't come. Mason sat in the darkness with his grandfather's pocket watch in his hand, waiting for dawn. The house looked different in the pre-dawn darkness. More ominous, shadows seeming to move when Mason wasn't looking directly at them. He parked his truck a block away, as Lowell had instructed, and walked the rest of the distance with his hands in his pockets and his senses on high alert. Lowell was already there, standing beside a nondescript grey sedan, dressed in dark clothing. He nodded as Mason approached, but didn't speak until they were both on the front porch. "Anyone follow you?" "Not that I noticed." "Good. Let's make this quick." Lowell pulled out a small flashlight. "You lead. I'll watch our backs." The house was exactly as Mason had left it, dusty, silent, frozen in time. They moved through the downstairs quickly, Lowell checking windows and sightlines. Then they climbed the stairs, each step creaking in the darkness. Mason's childhood bedroom door was closed. He paused with his hand on the knob, suddenly hesitant. Behind this door was evidence that could change everything. "Ready?" Lowell asked softly. Mason turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as he remembered the spaceship bedspread, the posters of planets, the small desk in the corner. But now, knowing what he was looking for, Mason saw it differently. He crossed to the center of the room and knelt down, running his hands over the hardwood floorboards. "Here," he said, finding a section where the boards didn't quite match. "This is where I used to lie and look at the glow in the dark stars on the ceiling." Lowell knelt beside him and examined the boards with his flashlight. "These have been disturbed. See how the nails are newer? Your mother pulled these up and replaced them." Mason's fingers found the edge of one board, and with pressure, it lifted easily. Beneath was a small metal box with a combination lock on the front. 47235, Mason whispered, spinning the dial with shaking hands. The lock clicked open. Inside was a USB drive, several folders of documents, and a smartphone relatively new, maybe 3 or 4 years old. Lowell picked up the phone and pressed the power button. It turned on, showing 20% battery. "Your mother left this charged. She used it recently." Mason opened one of the folders. Inside were photographs, surveillance photos taken with a telephoto lens. They showed a man in his 60s with grey hair and glasses, getting into expensive cars, entering office buildings. "That's not Granger," Mason said. "This man looks nothing like him." "Wait." Lowell took the photos and pulled up an old news photo of Granger on his phone. "The nose is different, the hair, but look at the eyes. The jaw underneath the weight gain. This could be him. Aged, with plastic surgery." Mason felt his heart hammering. "Where were these taken?" Lowell flipped through them. Different locations. Downtown. A parking garage. "This one," he stopped. "This one was taken outside a school." Mason grabbed the photo. In the background, through a chain-link fence, were children playing, and among them was a little girl with brown hair and a pink backpack. "Lily, he's been watching my daughter." Mason's voice came out strangled. "Your mother was watching him watching you." Lowell picked up the smartphone and navigated to the photo gallery. Hundreds of images, all of the same man, taken over several years. The most recent were dated 6 months before his mother's death. The phone's notes app revealed the full scope. Entry after entry. His mother had tracked this man's movements, his routines, his business dealings. And at the top of the most recent note, Walter Grayson Granger's new identity. Beneath that, an address, 2847 Maple Ridge Drive, Unit 12B. She found him. Mason breathed. She knew where he was. Lowell was typing the address into his phone. His face went pale. "That address is 3 miles from your apartment. He's been living in the same city this whole time." The implications crashed over Mason. Wallace Granger hadn't been sending threats from a distance. He'd been here, close enough to watch Mason's daily life, close enough to see Lily play, close enough to, "We need to leave," Lowell said urgently. "Right now." "What? Why?" "Because if your mother knew where he was, and if she was taking surveillance photos, then he knew she was watching him. Which means he knows about this house. And if he knows you inherited it," a sound from downstairs cut him off. The creak of a floorboard followed by another. Someone was in the house. Lowell's hand moved to his jacket, where Mason could now see the outline of a gun. He gestured for Mason to move toward the window. But before they could act, a voice called up from the stairway. "Mason Quinn, I know you're up there. We really should talk." The voice was cultured, educated, calm. It was also the voice of someone who had all the time in the world. Lowell positioned himself beside the bedroom door, gun drawn but pointed at the floor. Mason's mind raced. They were trapped on the second floor, with only one stairway down. "Your mother was a remarkable woman," the voice continued, closer now. "Stubborn, though. She never understood that some secrets are better left buried. I assume you found her little treasure box." Mason's hands curled into fists. This was him. Wallace Granger, the man who'd destroyed his family. "I don't want trouble," Granger said, reaching the top of the stairs. "I just want to talk, to explain, and to make you understand why it's better for everyone if you forget what you found." Lowell stepped out from beside the door, gun raised. "Federal agent, don't move." Silence. Then Granger laughed, dry and humorless. "Former federal agent Terry. We both know you retired 8 years ago. You have no authority here. I have enough authority to hold you until the real agents arrive, and they're already on their way." It was a bluff. Granger couldn't know whether it was true. Mason heard footsteps retreating, moving quickly down the stairs. The front door opened and slammed shut. "Stay here," Lowell commanded, already moving. But Mason wasn't staying. He followed Lowell down the stairs and out the front door, in time to see a dark, luxury sedan pulling away, tires squealing. Lowell was on his phone, rattling off a license plate number. Mason stood on the porch, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Granger was real. He was here. And now, he knew that Mason had found everything. "We need to get you and your daughter somewhere safe," Lowell said, ending his call. "Right now." "Lily." Mason was already moving toward his truck. "She's at the apartment, Mrs. Kowalski is supposed to take her to school. Call her. Tell her to keep Lily inside with doors locked until we get there." Mason's hands shook as he dialed. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. "She's not answering." Lowell's expression darkened. "How far?" 20 minutes in traffic. 15 if we hurry." Then we hurry. They ran for their vehicles. Mason's phone rang. "Unknown number," he answered, praying it was Mrs. Kowalski. "Hello, Mason," Granger's voice calm and controlled. "Your daughter is very pretty. Looks like her grandmother. It would be terrible if something happened to her because her father couldn't leave well enough alone." Mason's world narrowed to rage and terror. "If you touch her, I won't have to if you're reasonable. Destroy the evidence. Forget you came to this house. Your little girl gets to grow up with her father. Simple choice." The call ended. Mason drove 15 miles over the speed limit, checking his rearview mirror every few seconds, his phone clutched in one hand while the other gripped the steering wheel. Lowell followed close behind, and they'd agreed to stay on an open call. "Try Mrs. Kowalski again." Lowell's voice came through the speaker. Mason dialed one-handed. This time, on the 3rd ring, she answered. "Mason? I'm so sorry, dear. My phone was in my purse. Is everything all right?" The relief was so intense, Mason nearly had to pull over. "Mrs. Kowalski, is Lily with you?" "Of course. She's having breakfast. We're running a bit behind, but I'll get her to school on time." "Don't take her to school." Mason forced his voice to stay calm. "Keep her inside with the doors locked. I'm on my way home right now." There was a pause. "Mason, you're frightening me. I can't explain right now, but please just trust me. Keep her safe until I get there." "All right, we'll be here." Mason ended the call and heard Lowell immediately. "She's safe. That's good, but we need a plan. Granger knows we have the evidence, which means he's either running or preparing to eliminate the threat." What do we do? First, we secure your daughter. Then, we get her somewhere Granger can't find her. Lowell paused. I have a colleague who runs a safe house 2 hours north. Your daughter can stay there with protection while we handle this. I'm not sending her away. Mason, I said no. I won't do what my mother did. I won't send her away and make her think I abandoned her. Lowell was quiet for a moment. Then we bring in local police, get official protection. But that takes time. Time we might not have. Mason's mind raced. His mother had spent years thinking exactly like this, always calculating risk, always trying to stay one step ahead. What if we give him what he wants? What? What if we tell him we'll destroy the evidence? Set up, meeting, get him to come to us on our terms. That's dangerous. If he suspects it's a trap, then we make sure he doesn't suspect. We make him believe we're too scared to fight, just like my mother did. Lowell was silent. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. It could work, but we'd need backup, real backup. And we'd need to control the location, have exit strategies, ensure your daughter is nowhere near it. Can you arrange that? I can make calls. My contact at the Bureau owes me a favor. But Mason, if we do this, we're committed. There's no backing out. And if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, because we're going to stop running. They reached Mason's apartment within minutes. The man in the baseball cap was still across the street, and he nodded to Lowell as they pulled up. Mason took the stairs 2 at a time. Mrs. Kowalski opened the door immediately, worry creasing her face. Behind her, Lily sat at the kitchen table with cereal, looking confused and frightened. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Mason crossed the room and pulled her into a fierce hug. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart. I promise. You're scaring me. I know. I'm sorry." He pulled back and looked into her eyes. "I need you to be very brave right now. Can you do that?" She nodded, her lower lip trembling. Lowell had entered and was checking windows, making sure the apartment was secure. Mrs. Kowalski stood near the door, wringing her hands. "Mason, please tell me what's happening." He gave her the simplest truth he could. "Someone dangerous has been watching our family. Someone connected to my mother. We're handling it, but I need to keep Lily safe while we do." Lowell finished his check and gestured for Mason to join him in the hallway. "I made the calls. My contact can have agents here within 2 hours. They'll take you and your daughter to a secure location while we set up the meeting with Granger. 2 hours is a long time. It's the best I can do. My man outside will keep watch. If anyone suspicious approaches, he'll alert us." Mason nodded. "How do we contact Granger?" "We don't need to. He'll contact you. Men like him need to maintain control. Give him an hour, and he'll call again. When he does, you tell him you're willing to deal. Will he believe that? If you sell it right, you're a scared father protecting his child. That's not a role you have to fake." They returned to the apartment. Mason sat with Lily on the couch, trying to appear calm. Mrs. Kowalski made tea no one drank. Lowell stood by the window, watching the street. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Mason's phone sat on the coffee table, and he stared at it like it was counting down to something terrible. At the 50-minute mark it rang. "Unknown number." Mason answered on speaker so Lowell could hear. "Have you made your decision?" Granger's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Yes." Mason forced his voice to shake. "I'll destroy everything. The photos, the documents, all of it. Just leave my daughter alone." "A wise choice, but I'll need proof." "What kind of proof?" "Bring the metal box to a location. I'll specify. Bring the phone, everything your mother hid. I'll verify it's all there, and then we can go our separate ways." Mason looked at Lowell, who nodded. "Where?" "The old foundry on Industrial Way." "You know it?" Mason did. An abandoned steel mill on the edge of the city, isolated, full of places to hide. Exactly what someone like Granger would choose. "I know it. Come alone, 2 o'clock this afternoon. If I see anyone with you, the deal is off. And Mason, if the deal is off, you'll never see it coming." The call ended. Lily was staring at Mason with wide eyes. "Daddy, who was that?" "Someone I need to talk to, sweetheart. But don't worry, everything is going to be fine." Lowell was already on his phone, speaking rapidly. When he hung up, he turned to Mason. "We have 4 hours. The Bureau is sending a tactical team. They'll set up around the foundry before you arrive. You'll wear a wire, and the moment Granger confirms he's there, they'll move in. What if he runs? He won't have anywhere to run. That foundry is surrounded by open ground. Once he's inside, he's trapped." Mason's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Another photo, this one of the foundry. The message read, "Come alone. Don't be late." Mason showed it to Lowell, who studied it. "He's watching the location already. We'll need to be careful with team deployment." The next 3 hours passed in preparation. Federal agents arrived in unmarked cars, bringing equipment and conducting briefings. They wired Mason with a microphone, tested communications, and reviewed the foundry layout on blueprints. Through it all, Lily stayed close to Mason. He explained as much as he could that he was helping police catch a bad man, that there would be people there to keep him safe, that she would stay here until he came back. "But you will come back, right?" she asked, gripping his hand. Mason knelt down and looked into her eyes. "I promise you, sweetheart, I will come back. And when I do, we won't have to be scared anymore." At 1:30, Mason climbed into his truck with the metal box on the passenger seat. As he drove toward the foundry, he thought about his mother making this same kind of choice, deciding whether to fight or run. She'd chosen safety over justice, and it had cost her a lifetime of loneliness. Mason was choosing differently. The foundry appeared on the horizon, a hulking shadow of rusted steel. Mason's hands were steady now, his fear replaced by determination. Whatever happened in the next hour, Wallace Granger's reign of terror was ending today. The foundry loomed against the afternoon sky like a monument to a forgotten industrial age. Mason pulled into the empty parking lot at exactly 2 o'clock, gravel crunching under his tires. The main building was massive, 3 stories of rusted steel and shattered windows. Mason sat in his truck for a moment, steadying his breathing. Through the wire hidden under his shirt, he heard Lowell's voice in the tiny earpiece. "We're in position. 6 agents on the perimeter, 3 in the building. When you go inside, we'll have eyes on you. You're not alone." Mason picked up the metal box and stepped out. The air smelled of rust and decay. He walked toward the main entrance, a loading dock with the door hanging half off its hinges. "Mason Quinn," the voice echoed from inside. "Come in. We have much to discuss." Mason climbed onto the loading dock and stepped through the doorway. The interior was dim, lit only by afternoon sunlight streaming through holes in the roof. The space had once been a manufacturing floor. He could see oil stains that decades hadn't erased. Granger stood in the center, perhaps 50 feet away. He looked different from his photos, older, grayer, but still imposing. He wore an expensive suit that seemed absurd in this derelict building. "You came alone. Good. That shows wisdom." Mason walked forward slowly, the metal box held in front of him. "I brought everything, all of it. Set it down. Step back." Mason complied, placing the box on the concrete and retreating. Granger approached cautiously, never taking his eyes off Mason. He knelt and opened the box, examining the contents. "Your mother was thorough. I'll give her that." Granger's voice carried respect, or perhaps regret. "She spent 20 years building this case against me. She was protecting her son. She was wasting her time." Granger stood, the phone in his hand. "Do you know how many people I've destroyed, Mason? Dozens. Maybe hundreds if you count the families. And not one ever brought me to justice. Your mother thought she could be different, but in the end, she died alone with her secrets." Mason felt rage building but forced himself to stay calm. "You won. You got away with it. Can't that be enough? Unfortunately, no. Granger pulled something from his jacket, a small handgun. Even though you brought me this evidence, I can't trust it's the only copy. Your mother was clever. She might have made backups. And you've seen my face, know my new identity. You're a loose end, Mason. And I don't leave loose ends. In his earpiece, Mason heard Lowell's urgent voice. Get down. Now! Mason dropped to the floor as the foundry erupted. Federal agents burst through multiple entrances, weapons drawn, voices shouting, FBI, drop the weapon! Granger spun, his gun swinging toward the nearest agent. A shot rang out from Granger, and Mason heard someone cry out. Then Granger was running, moving with surprising speed, heading toward a side door. He's running south, Lowell's voice crackled. Suspect fleeing toward the smelting building. Mason scrambled to his feet. An agent was down near the entrance, another providing first aid. The rest were giving chase, but Granger had a head start. Mason ran after them, ignoring shouts, to stay back. His grandfather's pocket watch bounced in his jacket pocket, reminding him of who he was and what he was fighting for. The smelting building was a maze of catwalks and rusted equipment. Mason could hear footsteps above, the metallic clang of boots on steel. He found a stairway and climbed, following the sounds. On the second-floor catwalk, he saw Granger ahead, moving along a narrow walkway suspended 15 feet above concrete. 2 agents were closing in from the opposite direction. There's nowhere to go, one shouted. It's over! Granger stopped, trapped between the agents and the dead end. He still held the gun, but his hand was shaking, his composure finally cracking. You don't understand, he called out. I built an empire. I was respected. And they wanted to destroy me over a few investments that went bad. You stole $15 million from people who trusted you, Mason said, stepping onto the catwalk. An agent tried to pull him back, but he shook off the two-hand. You threatened my mother. You terrorized her for decades. You made her choose between justice and her child. She should have stayed quiet. Granger's face was flushed. I gave her that option. She did disappear, but she never stopped watching you. She spent every day building the case that's going to put you away forever. Granger laughed, bitter and desperate. You think this ends with me in prison? I have friends, Quinn. People who owe me. He never finished. The rusted catwalk beneath his feet, weakened by decades of corrosion, suddenly gave way with a screaming groan of metal. Granger's arms windmilled as he fell, the gun flying from his hand. He managed to grab the edge of the broken catwalk, his body dangling above the concrete below. Help me. His voice was terrified now. Please. 2 agents moved immediately, crawling carefully onto the damaged section, extending hands toward Granger. Mason stood frozen, watching the man who destroyed his family hanging by his common fingertips. In his mind, he heard his mother's voice from the journal. I hope someday you understand. He understood now. She'd spent her entire adult life in this man's shadow, never giving up hope that justice would prevail. Let the rust and decay finish what decades of pursuit couldn't, or he could be better than the man who'd terrorized his family. Mason pushed past the agents and dropped to his stomach on the catwalk, reaching down. His hand closed around Granger's wrist just as the man's grip finally failed. I've got you, Mason said through gritted teeth, but you're going to face what you did. Every victim, every life you destroyed. You're going to answer for all of it. Other hands joined his agents, helping to pull Granger up, securing him, snapping handcuffs on his wrists. The older man collapsed onto the catwalk, gasping. Mason Quinn, one of the agents said formally, please step back. This is now an active arrest situation. Mason stood slowly, his whole body shaking. Through broken windows, he could see more vehicles arriving, hear sirens. It was over. After 3 decades, Wallace Granger was in custody. Lowell appeared at Mason's side, breathing hard. The agent who was shot, he's going to be okay. Vest stopped the bullet. And we've got everything. The evidence, Granger's confession on tape, everything we need. Mason nodded, unable to speak. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his grandfather's pocket watch, feeling its weight. The old man had taught him to be steady, to be strong, and his mother had taught him that sometimes love meant making impossible choices. They'd both been with him today. "Your daughter is safe," Lowell continued gently. "She's been asking about you, wants to know when you're coming home." "Soon," Mason managed. "Tell her soon." They led Granger down from the catwalk, the once powerful man now stumbling and defeated. As they passed Mason, Granger looked up, meeting his eyes. "Your mother was right about you," he said quietly. "You're stronger than she was." "No," Mason replied. "I'm exactly as strong as she was. I just didn't have to face it alone." Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Mason stood in the parking lot, watching as they loaded Granger into a federal vehicle. Agents swarmed over the scene, securing evidence. Mason's phone buzzed. A text from the agent watching Lily. "She wants to talk to you." He dialed immediately. "Lily? Daddy? Are you okay? When are you coming home?" Her voice was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. "I'm fine, sweetheart, completely fine. And I'm coming home right now." As he climbed into his truck and started the engine, Mason realized the weight he'd been carrying for his entire adult life had finally lifted. His mother's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Her vigilance, her documentation, her refusal to let Granger's crimes be forgotten had brought him to justice. She'd won, even in death she'd won, and Mason was finally, truly free. 2 weeks after Granger's arrest, Mason sat across from Special Agent Cordelia Hastings in a small conference room at the FBI field office. The walls were beige, the furniture generic, but the woman across from him was anything but ordinary. In her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, she'd been reviewing his mother's evidence with the intensity of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "Your mother was meticulous," Hastings said, spreading documents across the table. "In 23 years, she documented every transaction, every victim, every connection. This isn't just evidence against Granger. This is evidence against an entire network." Mason leaned forward, studying the papers. A network? Granger didn't act alone. He couldn't have. To stay hidden for 3 decades, to build a new identity, to continue operating, he needed help. Your mother identified at least 6 individuals who assisted him. Some knowingly, some perhaps not, but all of them profited from his crimes. Hastings pulled out a chart, showing names connected by lines. "These are the associates. This one," she tapped a name, "is a lawyer who helped Granger create shell companies. This one is an accountant who moved money through offshore accounts. This one provided fake identification documents. Can you prosecute them? We're building cases now. But here's where it gets interesting." Hastings pulled out another document. "Your mother didn't just document the past. She documented recent activity. Granger has been running smaller schemes under his new identity, not as ambitious as before, but still defrauding people, still stealing." Mason felt his jaw tighten. "How many victims? In the last 5 years? At least 20 that we've identified so far. Elderly people, mostly. People who trusted Walter Grayson, just like others trusted Wallace Granger 30 years ago." The thought made Mason sick. While his mother had been dying alone in that house, Granger had been continuing to destroy lives, confident he'd never face consequences. "There's something else," Hastings said, her voice dropping. "We found correspondence on Granger's personal computer, emails between him and someone who knew about your mother's surveillance. Someone who was helping him monitor her movements." Mason's blood ran cold. "Who?" "We're still working on identifying them. The emails used encryption and anonymous servers. But whoever it was, they knew your mother was getting close. And there's one email, dated 3 days before your mother died, that concerns us." She slid a printout across the table. Mason read the text, his hands beginning to shake. The Quinn woman is becoming a problem. She was at your office again yesterday with her camera. If she goes to the authorities with what she has, we're all exposed. This needs to be resolved. Permanently. Mason looked up, his voice hoarse. Are you saying someone killed my mother? Her death certificate lists natural causes, heart failure, but your mother's medical records show she was relatively healthy for her age. No history of heart problems. And this email suggests someone wanted her dead 3 days before it happened. The room seemed to tilt. Mason gripped the edge of the table. You think Granger had her murdered? I think it's a possibility we need to investigate. We're requesting an exhumation and autopsy. If there's evidence of foul play, we'll find it. Mason stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot below. His mother hadn't just died alone. She might have been killed, murdered by the same man she'd spent decades trying to bring to justice. There's more, Hastings said quietly. We need your help. Mason turned back to face her. Granger isn't talking. He lawyered up immediately, and his attorney is good. Very good. The evidence your mother gathered is strong, but Granger's defense will argue it's circumstantial, that the statute of limitations has expired on many of the original crimes, that Walter Grayson is a different person who can't be held responsible for Wallace Granger's actions. That's insane. That's expensive legal representation. But here's what we do have your testimony. You can speak to your mother's state of mind, to the fear she lived with, to the threats Granger made. You can humanize the victims in a way documents can't. And most importantly, you can testify about Granger's recent actions. The phone call threatening your daughter. His admission at the foundry. Mason returned to his chair. When? The preliminary hearing is in 3 weeks. If the judge finds sufficient evidence, it goes to trial. That could be 6 months from now, maybe longer. Your testimony at the hearing could make the difference between Granger walking free on bail or staying in custody until trial. The thought of Granger walking free, even temporarily, made Mason's stomach turn. I'll testify, whatever you need. Good, because there's one more thing. Hastings hesitated. Granger's attorney has indicated they might want to call you as a witness for the defense. What? Why? They'll argue that you had motive to fabricate evidence, that you were angry at your mother for abandoning you, angry at Granger for the threats. They'll try to paint you as someone seeking revenge rather than justice. Mason felt anger flare hot in his chest. That's not what this is about. I know that, but you need to be prepared. They're going to try to discredit you, to make the jury doubt your motives. You'll need to stay calm, stay focused, and tell the truth exactly as it happened. Over the next 2 weeks, Mason prepared for the hearing. He met with prosecutors, reviewed his mother's evidence, and practiced his testimony. Lowell flew back to help, coaching Mason on how to handle hostile questioning. They're going to try to rattle you, Lowell said during one of their sessions. They'll bring up your mother's abandonment, suggest you're emotionally unstable, imply you're lying for attention or money. Don't take the bait. Answer the questions simply and honestly. Mason also spent time with the victims, the elderly men and women Granger had defrauded over the decades. Some were from the original case in the 1992nd, now in their 80s and 90s. Others were recent victims of Walter Grayson's schemes. One woman, Mrs. Chen, was 87 years old. She'd lost her entire retirement savings to Granger in 1994. I trusted him, she said, her voice wavering. He seemed so kind, so professional. He said he could help me grow my money, secure my future. Instead, he took everything. I had to move in with my daughter. I couldn't afford my own home anymore. Mason listened to story after story, each one more heartbreaking than the last. These were the people his mother had been fighting for. These were the lives Granger had destroyed without a second thought. The night before the hearing, Mason couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table with his mother's journal open in front of him, reading her entries one more time. Lily was asleep down the hall, safe and secure, unaware of the storm that had been swirling around their lives. Mason's phone buzzed. A text from Lowell. "Ready for tomorrow." Mason typed back, "As ready as I'll ever be." Another message came through. "Your mother would be proud. What you're doing takes courage." Mason looked at the journal entry dated the 12th of September 1995, the day his mother had left. He read her words again. "I'd rather have him hate me and be safe than love me and be in danger." He understood now that love wasn't always about presence. Sometimes it was about sacrifice. Sometimes it was about making the hardest choice and living with the consequences so others could have a future. His mother had made that choice, and now Mason was honoring it by finishing what she'd started. He closed the journal and walked to Lily's room, opening the door just enough to see her sleeping peacefully. This was what his mother had given him, the chance to raise his daughter without fear, without looking over his shoulder, without wondering if danger was lurking in the shadows. Tomorrow he would stand in a courtroom and tell the truth. He would speak for his mother, who could no longer speak for herself. He would speak for the victims, who deserved justice after decades of waiting. And he would speak for Lily, to ensure she grew up in a world where people like Wallace Granger couldn't terrorize families with impunity. Mason returned to his bedroom and lay down, finally feeling the exhaustion catch up with him. As he drifted towards sleep, he thought about the house on Riverside Avenue, about the black chest hidden above a sealed toilet, about all the secrets his mother had kept to protect him. She'd spent 23 years preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, building a case, hoping that someday justice would prevail. She died before seeing it happen, but her work, her sacrifice, had made it possible. Tomorrow, in that courtroom, Mason would make sure her sacrifice meant something. He would make sure Wallace Granger finally faced the consequences of his crimes. And he would make sure his mother's legacy was one of courage, perseverance, and a love so fierce it transcended death itself. The courthouse was an imposing granite building in the heart of downtown, all columns and marble, and the weight of institutional authority. Mason arrived early, wearing the only suit he owned, his grandfather's pocket watch tucked safely in his inside pocket. Lily was with Mrs. Kowalski, safely away from the media circus that had gathered outside. Lowell met him at the security checkpoint, along with Agent Hastings and 2 prosecutors from the U.S. Attorney's office. "Big crowd," Mason observed, noting the news vans and cameras. "This is the biggest white-collar crime case this city has seen in decades," Hastings said. "People want to see justice finally served." Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators. Mason recognized some of the faces victims from his mother's documentation, elderly men and women who'd waited 30 years for this day. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, her daughter beside her, both watching the proceedings with fierce attention. The prosecutors briefed Mason one final time. "Remember, keep your answers short and factual. Don't elaborate unless asked. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification. And don't let the defense attorney provoke you." At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Drummond." Everyone stood as the judge entered, a woman in her 60s, with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. "Be seated," she said, settling behind the bench. "We're here for the preliminary hearing in the matter of United States versus Wallace Granger, also known as Walter Grayson. Is the government ready to proceed?" "We are, Your Honor," the lead prosecutor said, standing. "Is the defense ready?" Granger's attorney stood, a man in an expensive suit with carefully styled grey hair. "We are, Your Honor." Mason caught his first glimpse of Granger since the foundry. The man sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, without the suit and the confidence. But when his eyes met Mason's across the courtroom, there was still that cold calculation, that sense of a predator assessing prey. The prosecution began by calling Agent Hastings to establish the basics of the case, the original fraud charges from 1995, Granger's disappearance, the decades of searching, and finally his capture. She testified for nearly an hour, methodically laying out the evidence. Then they called Mason. The government calls Mason Quinn to the stand. Mason stood, his legs steadier than he'd expected. He walked to the witness box, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a woman named Anderson, approached with a kind smile. "Mr. Quinn, can you state your relationship to the defendant? He threatened my mother and me when I was a child. He's the reason she disappeared from my life for 23 years. "Objection," Granger's attorney said immediately. "Inflammatory and conclusory." "Sustained," Judge Drummond said. "Mr. Quinn, please limit your answers to facts, not conclusions." Mason nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Anderson tried again. "Mr. Quinn, can you tell the court about your mother, Lorraine Quinn? She raised me alone until I was 10 years old. In September 1995, she left suddenly. I didn't see her or hear from her again until she died earlier this year. And what did you discover after her death?" "I inherited her house. Inside, hidden, in the bathroom, I found a locked chest. Inside that chest were letters, photographs, and journals documenting her relationship with Wallace Granger and his crimes." "Can you describe what those documents revealed?" Mason took a breath. "They revealed that my mother had discovered Granger was defrauding elderly clients. When she confronted him, he threatened her. He threatened me specifically, using me as leverage to keep her quiet. She left to protect me because as long as she stayed away, I wasn't useful to him anymore." "Did your mother maintain surveillance on the defendant after she left?" "Yes. For 23 years, she documented his movements, his activities, his new identity. She never stopped building the case against him." Anderson walked Mason through the contents of the chest, the letters Granger had sent over the years, the photographs of him watching Mason and Lily. With each piece of evidence, Mason saw Granger's attorney making notes, preparing for cross-examination. Finally, Anderson asked about the foundry. "Can you describe what happened when you met the defendant at the abandoned steel mill?" Mason recounted the meeting in detail, Granger's admission that he'd destroyed dozens of lives, his gun, his statement that Mason was a loose end, and finally his attempt to flee before being captured. "And during this encounter, did the defendant make any threats regarding your daughter?" "Yes. Before the meeting, he called me. He said my daughter was very pretty and that it would be terrible if something happened to her because I couldn't leave well enough alone." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Drummond gavelled for silence. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn." Anderson returned to her seat. "Your witness." Granger's attorney stood, adjusting his tie. His name was Pemberton, and he had the look of someone who charged $1,000 an hour. "Mr. Quinn," he began, his voice smooth, "you've testified that you never met my client until recently. Is that correct?" "That's correct." "So everything you know about him comes from your mother's documents?" "Yes, documents you found hidden in a house that had been abandoned for months, documents that no one can verify your mother actually wrote." Mason felt anger flash hot. "They're in her handwriting. They reference specific details about my childhood that only she would know. Or that you would know, having lived that childhood." Pemberton smiled slightly. "Mr. Quinn, isn't it true that you were angry at your mother for abandoning you?" "I was, until I understood why she did it." "And isn't it possible that these documents, these conveniently discovered documents, are your way of creating a narrative that makes your mother look heroic rather than neglectful?" Mason's hands clenched on the railing of the witness box. "No, that's not what happened. Mr. Quinn, Did you know that there's a substantial reward fund for information leading to Wallace Granger's capture? Nearly $200,000 contributed by victims over the years? Mason's stomach dropped. He hadn't known that. Pemberton's smile widened. So you stand to profit considerably from my client's conviction, isn't that right? Mason's mind raced. He hadn't known about any reward, hadn't even considered financial gain. But Pemberton was making it sound like everything, his mother's evidence, his testimony, the entire case was motivated by greed. I didn't know about any reward, Mason said, keeping his voice steady. That's not why I came forward. But you stand to benefit financially, correct? If my client is convicted, you'll receive a substantial sum of money? Objection, Anderson said, standing. The existence of a reward fund doesn't negate the validity of the evidence or the witness's testimony. Goes to credibility and motive, Your Honor, Pemberton countered. Judge Drummond considered. I'll allow it, but move on, Mr. Pemberton. You've made your point. Pemberton nodded, seeming satisfied. Mr. Quinn, you testified that your mother documented my client's activities for 23 years, yet she never went to the police. Why is that? Because he threatened to hurt me if she did. So she claimed in her journals. Journals that, again, no one can verify she actually wrote. Mason felt his anger rising but fought to control it. The FBI has verified her handwriting. They've confirmed the documents are authentic. The FBI has confirmed their old documents in handwriting consistent with your mother's. That doesn't prove when they were written or under what circumstances. Pemberton paced in front of the witness box. Isn't it possible, Mr. Quinn, that your mother was mentally unstable? That her paranoia led her to create an elaborate fantasy about being terrorized by a man she barely knew? No, that's not. Isn't it true that abandoning one's child is often a sign of mental illness, depression, psychosis? Objection. Anderson was on her feet. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning. Sustained. Ask questions, Mr. Pemberton. Pemberton changed tactics. Mr. Quinn, you testified that my client called you before your meeting at the foundry. Do you have a recording of that call? No. Phone records showing the call came from his number. He used a blocked number. So we only have your word that this call happened. The FBI heard him threaten me at the foundry. That's on tape. We'll get to that. But this phone call, this alleged threat against your daughter, there's no proof it ever happened, is there? Mason's jaw tightened. I know what I heard. What you claim you heard. Mr. Quinn, isn't it true that you wanted revenge against the man you blamed for your mother's abandonment? That you created this elaborate scenario to punish him? That's not true. Then explain to the court why, if your mother had all this evidence, she never once contacted law enforcement in 23 years. Mason took a breath, remembering what he'd learned from his mother's journals. She did contact law enforcement. She worked with FBI agent Terrence Lowell in 1995. She provided him with information, but she refused to testify because she was afraid for my safety. Convenient that Agent Lowell is retired and can't be compelled to testify at this preliminary hearing. He's in the courtroom right now, Mason said, spotting Lowell in the gallery. He can testify to everything. Pemberton paused, clearly not expecting that response. He glanced at his notes, regrouping. Let me ask you this, Mr. Quinn. At the foundry, when my client allegedly pulled a gun, there's nothing alleged about it. Multiple FBI agents witnessed it. When my client pulled what appeared to be a gun, you were wearing a wire, correct? Yes. So the entire encounter was staged. You lured my client there under false pretenses, wearing recording equipment, with FBI agents hidden throughout the building. Isn't that entrapment? He came there planning to kill me. He said I was a loose end, according to your interpretation of his words, but context matters, Mr. Quinn. My client is an elderly man who'd been harassed by your mother for years. When you contacted him claiming to have evidence she'd gathered, he was frightened. He brought a gun for protection, not aggression. Mason couldn't stay quiet. He shot at a federal agent. After being ambushed by multiple armed individuals, he was defending himself. "Your Honor," Anderson interjected, "is counsel testifying again, or does he have an actual question for the witness?" Judge Drummond looked at Pemberton over her glasses. "Do you have any further questions, Counselor?" Pemberton studied Mason for a long moment. "Just one, Mr. Quinn. Do you expect this court to believe that your mother, a woman who abandoned you, who never contacted you, who left you to be raised by your grandfather, suddenly becomes a hero because of documents you found in a chest? Isn't the simpler explanation that she was an unstable woman who left her child, and you're trying to rewrite history to make yourself feel better about it?" The courtroom was silent. Mason could feel everyone's eyes on him. He thought about his mother watching him from across the street at the ice cream shop. He thought about her surveillance photos of Granger, taken over years. He thought about the letters she'd never sent, the journal entries documenting her fear and her love. He looked directly at Granger, then back at Pemberton. "My mother spent 23 years of her life making sure this man would eventually face justice," Mason said, his voice steady and clear. "She documented everything because she knew someday someone would find it. She sacrificed her relationship with me, her chance at happiness, her entire future, all to protect me and to make sure the truth came out. That's not mental illness. That's courage. That's love. And no amount of expensive legal maneuvering is going to change. What she proved, that your client is a predator who destroyed dozens of lives and got away with it for 30 years. But not anymore." Pemberton stared at him, then turned away. "No further questions." Anderson stood for redirect. "Mr. Quinn, you mentioned FBI agent Lowell. Is he prepared to corroborate your mother's contact with law enforcement?" "Yes. And the surveillance photos your mother took, do they show the defendant in locations he's now denied being?" "Yes." "Thank you. Nothing further." Judge Drummond looked at Mason. "You may step down." Mason returned to his seat, his hands shaking now that it was over. Lowell leaned forward from the row behind and squeezed his shoulder. "Well done," he whispered. The prosecution called Lowell next, and his testimony was devastating. He confirmed that Lorraine Quinn had been a reliable informant, that her information had been accurate, that she'd refused to testify only because of credible threats. He detailed his decades of attempted investigation, the dead ends, and finally the breakthrough when Mason had contacted him. When the hearing finally ended, Judge Drummond didn't hesitate. "Based on the evidence presented, I find probable cause that the defendant committed the crimes alleged. The defendant will remain in custody without bail pending trial. This court is adjourned." The gavel fell, and it was over. 3 months later, Mason stood in front of the house on Riverside Avenue, but this time he wasn't alone. Lily held his hand on one side, and around them gathered a small crowd. Neighbors, community organizers, and several families who'd been affected by Wallace Granger's crimes. The house looked different now. Fresh paint in cream and blue replaced the peeling exterior. New windows gleamed in the afternoon sun. The overgrown yard had been transformed into a welcoming garden. And above the front porch hung a new sign: the Quinn House Community Center for Single Parents. Lowell stood near the door, hands in his pockets, a satisfied smile on his face. Beside him was Agent Hastings, who'd led the investigation that had uncovered 6 of Granger's associates and recovered millions in stolen assets. "Your mother would be proud," Lowell said as Mason approached. "I hope so." Mason looked up at the house. "She spent so many years here alone. It feels right to turn it into something that helps people." The reward money from the FBI had been substantial enough to secure Lily's future with a college fund and to renovate the house. Mason had also received restitution on behalf of his mother's estate, money seized from Granger's hidden accounts. But more important than the money was the closure. Granger had been convicted 3 weeks ago on all counts. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. He'd been sentenced to 40 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence for a man in his 60s. His associates had received sentences ranging from 10 to 25 years. "Can we go inside?" Lily asked, tugging on his hand. "In a minute, sweetheart. I need to say something first." The crowd quieted as Mason turned to face them. Public speaking still made him uncomfortable, but this was important. "My mother, Lorraine Quinn, lived in this house for 23 years, Mason began. "She made a choice that cost her everything, her relationship with me, her peace of mind, her chance at happiness. She made that choice to protect me, and she spent every day after working to bring a dangerous man to justice." He paused, his voice thickening with emotion. "I didn't understand her sacrifice until recently. I thought she'd abandoned me because I wasn't enough. But she loved me so much that she was willing to become the villain in my story if it meant I'd be safe." Lily squeezed his hand. This house was her sanctuary and her prison. Now it's going to be a place where single parents can find support, resources, childcare, and community. Because my mother knew what it was like to face impossible choices, to sacrifice everything for your child's safety. And I want her legacy to be about helping others. The crowd applauded. Lowell handed Mason a pair of scissors and a ribbon stretched across the door. "Would you like to do the honors?" Lowell asked. Mason looked down at Lily. "Actually, I think my daughter should do it. This is for her generation as much as ours." Lily took the scissors with both hands, her face serious. Together, they cut the ribbon. It fell away, and the door to the Quinn house swung open. People filed inside, exploring the transformed space. The living room was now a common area with comfortable furniture and books. The kitchen had been equipped to teach cooking classes. Upstairs, the bedrooms had been converted into offices for counselors and volunteers. Mason's old bedroom was now a children's playroom, painted in cheerful colors. But in one corner, preserved behind glass, was his original spaceship bedspread and one poster. A small plaque read, "In memory of Lorraine Quinn, a mother's love knows no distance." Lily pressed her face against the glass. "Tell me again about Grandma." Mason knelt beside her. "Your grandma was the bravest person I've ever known. She made choices that were hard, choices that hurt, because she loved me more than anything. Even though she couldn't be with me, she watched over me every day. Do you think she can see us now?" Mason looked around the room at the transformation, at the good coming from decades of pain, at the community gathering to support each other. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think she can. And I think she's finally at peace." Later that evening, after the ceremony had ended and the crowd had dispersed, Mason returned alone to the house. He walked through the quiet rooms, remembering how they'd looked that first day, dusty, abandoned, full of secrets. He climbed the stairs to what had been his mother's bedroom. It was now an office. But he'd kept one thing, a framed photograph he'd found in her dresser. It showed him as a baby, cradled in his mother's arms, both of them smiling. On the back, in her handwriting, "My greatest joy, my deepest love." Mason's phone buzzed. A text from Hastings. "Thought you'd want to know the exhumation results," came back. "Your mother died of natural causes, no evidence of foul play. She was just tired, Mason." Her heart finally gave out. Mason stared at the message, relief washing over him. His mother hadn't been murdered. She'd simply run out of time, her body giving out after decades of stress and vigilance. He replied, "Thank you for letting me know." Another text came through. "She did good work. You should be proud." Mason pocketed his phone and looked at the photograph again. "I am proud, Mom," he said to the empty room. "And I finally understand. You didn't leave because you didn't love me. You left because you loved me too much to let me be used as a weapon against you." He pulled out his grandfather's pocket watch, holding it in his palm. The old man had taught him to be steady, to be strong. His mother had taught him that sometimes love meant sacrifice. Together, they'd made him who he was. Mason left the house and locked the door behind him. Tomorrow, the Quinn house would open its doors to its first families, single parents struggling with impossible choices, looking for support and community. His mother's legacy would live on, not in the pain she'd endured, but in the help she could now provide to others walking similar paths. As Mason drove home where Lily was waiting, he realized the weight he'd carried his entire adult life had finally lifted. His mother's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Her love, expressed through distance and silence, had been real and profound. And now, finally, he was free to love his daughter without fear, to be present in her life without looking over his shoulder, to build a future unburdened by the past. His mother had given him that gift, and he would honor it every day for the rest of his life.